They kicked me out at 16. 12 years later, I walked into their $5 million mansion. Mom froze. Dad went pale. Having you here listening to me means a lot. Watch until the end and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I'm really curious to see how far my story is reaching. Get out of my house. I don't want to see your face ever again. My father's words still echo in my head, even after all these years. I was just 16 when my parents decided I wasn't worth keeping around anymore. That rainy November evening changed everything. I had just told them I wanted to apply to art school instead of the business program my father had selected for me. The Monroes didn't raise artists. We produced CEOs, lawyers, and doctors. Anything less was failure. You're throwing away your future for some childish hobby. My mother hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather armrest of our living room sofa. My father stood by the fireplace, his face contorted with disappointment. No daughter of mine is going to be a starving artist. Either follow the path we've laid out for you, or you're no longer welcome in this family. I should have backed down. I should have nodded and apologized. But something inside me refused to bend. I won't live your version of my life. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. Then don't live here at all. 2 hours later, I was standing in the driveway with a hastily packed duffel bag, the front door locked behind me. My little brother Jacob watched from his bedroom window, tears streaming down his face. He was only 12, too young to understand, too young to help. The first night, I slept in a 24-hour diner, nursing a cup of coffee until dawn. The waitress, Marlene, kept refilling it without asking for more money. She probably saw the terror in my eyes. "Where are your parents, honey?" she asked when her shift ended. "They don't want me anymore," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. Marlene bit her lip and scribbled something on a napkin. "My sister runs a shelter for women. It's not fancy, but it's safe. Tell her I sent you." The shelter became my home for the next 3 months. I finished high school while working at a local coffee shop. No one from my old life reached out. Not my former friends whose parents probably heard I was troubled. Not my extended family who always followed my parents' lead, and certainly not my parents themselves. For my graduation, I sat alone in the audience. When they called Michelle Monroe, there was no cheering section, no proud parents taking photos. I accepted my diploma with a hollow smile, changed into my work uniform in the school bathroom, and made it to my evening shift at the coffee shop just in time. My manager, Dave, noticed the graduation tassel sticking out of my backpack. "You graduated today? Why are you here?" I shrugged. "Rent doesn't pay itself." He looked at me for a long moment. "Go home, Michelle. I'll cover your shift. This is a day you should celebrate." Home. Such a simple word that meant nothing to me anymore. I had a rented room in a shared apartment by then, but it wasn't home. Home was supposed to be where people loved you unconditionally. I hadn't experienced that since I was 16. Instead of going back to my empty room, I found myself walking past my parents' estate. The iron gates were closed as always, but through them, I could see the sprawling mansion where I grew up. Lights glowed in the windows, and I caught a glimpse of movement in the dining room, probably the family dinner I was no longer invited to. I pressed my hand against the cold metal of the gate, feeling like a ghost haunting her own past. A security guard noticed me and started walking over. I turned and ran before he could ask questions. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never again stand outside those gates feeling worthless. Someday, I would return on my own terms. I just didn't know it would take 12 years and the most bizarre twist of fate to make it happen. I had no idea that my little brother Jacob had been watching for me from his window that night. Years later, he told me he saw me at the gate and begged our parents to let me in. My father's response? "We don't have a daughter anymore." Those words became my fuel. Every rejection, every night I went to bed hungry, every time I had to choose between paying rent or buying textbooks, it all strengthened my resolve. The Monroes didn't raise quitters. That, at least, was in my blood. And though they had discarded me like I was nothing, I would show them exactly what they had thrown away. I never imagined I'd become successful. After being kicked out, success wasn't about wealth or recognition. It was just about surviving another day. The first year was the hardest. I bounced between the women's shelter and cheap rooms I could barely afford. I worked at the coffee shop in the mornings, a restaurant at night, and a retail store on weekends. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My hands were always raw from cleaning chemicals and hot water. My feet ached constantly from standing 16-hour days. But I never missed a day of work. I couldn't. My small victory came when I applied for a design scholarship at the local community college. The application required a portfolio, which I created using discarded materials from construction sites and dumpsters behind art supply stores. I stayed up 3 nights straight finishing it, then delivered it personally to make sure it wouldn't get lost. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. I had earned a partial scholarship. It wasn't enough to quit any of my jobs, but it was enough to start classes. That letter was the first piece of mail addressed to me since I left home. I cried for an hour, then got up for my evening shift. College was a blur of exhaustion and determination. I would nod off during lectures, then stay up listening to recordings to catch what I'd missed. My professors noticed my bloodshot eyes and gaunt appearance, but they also noticed my work. My designs had a raw, unconventional quality that stood out. "You have natural talent, Michelle," my interior design professor, MS Reynolds, told me after class one day. "But you look like you're about to collapse." I forced a smile. "I'm fine." She wasn't convinced. "I have a friend who runs a design firm. They need an intern. It pays better than retail or food service, and the experience would be valuable for you." I wanted to hug her, but I maintained my composure. I'd be very interested. That internship changed everything. For the first time, I was working in my field, even if I was just organizing fabric samples and running errands. I absorbed everything, volunteered for every task, and stayed late without being asked. The firm's owner, Diane Hawthorne, started to take notice. "You have a good eye, Michelle," she said after I suggested a different material for a client project. "Where did you study before community college?" "Nowhere," I answered honestly. "I taught myself from library books." Something softened in Diane's expression. "And your family? Are they supportive of your career choice?" I hesitated. "I don't have family." She didn't pry further, but the next day, she offered me a part-time position while I finished school. The salary was enough that I could quit one of my other jobs. "This is an investment in your future," she said, "and in my company's future." By 21, I had my associate's degree and a full-time position at Hawthorne Design. I found a tiny studio apartment that didn't have roaches or suspicious stains. I bought my first new piece of furniture, a desk where I could sketch designs. It wasn't much, but it was mine. At 23, I was promoted to junior designer and assigned my first solo client, a local restaurant needing a refresh. I poured everything into that project, working through weekends and holidays. When it was featured in a regional design magazine, Diane framed the article for me. "You're going places, Michelle," she said. "I hope you know that." I did know it. For the first time, I could see a future that wasn't just about survival. I was good at this. Really good. By 25, I had enough savings and confidence to apply to finish my bachelor's degree at the prestigious Newland Institute of Design. My portfolio was strong, my recommendation stellar. When the acceptance letter arrived, I stared at it for hours, unable to believe it was real. "You earned this," Diane insisted when I tried to thank her for her recommendation. I just confirmed what was obvious to anyone with eyes. 2 years later, degree in hand, I made the biggest decision of my life. I thanked Diane for everything and started my own firm, Monroe Design. Taking my family's name was deliberate, a small act of defiance. They might have rejected me, but I would make their name mean something different in the design world. My first major client came through a referral from Diane. A tech CEO wanted his penthouse completely redesigned. My concept was bold, perhaps too bold. I almost scaled it back, afraid of rejection. But then I remembered I had nothing to lose. I presented my original vision. He loved it, and he told his friends. Within 2 years, Monroe Design had a waiting list. My minimalist with an edge approach became my signature. I hired staff. I moved the studio to a renovated warehouse space. I was featured in Architectural Digest. I designed homes for celebrities, executives, and old money families who had no idea I had once been homeless. At 28, I bought my first home, a penthouse in the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop garden. I stood in the empty space after closing, twirling slowly, trying to comprehend how far I had come. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about Monroe Industries, my father's company. The headline made my heart stop. Monroe Industries facing bankruptcy, family estate listed for sale. I sat on the floor of my empty penthouse, staring at my phone. After 12 years of silence, the universe had delivered the most unexpected twist. My parents, who had everything and threw me away for wanting to follow my passion, were now losing everything. Their $5 million mansion, my childhood home, was being sold to cover debts. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even happiness. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, followed by an idea so audacious it made me dizzy. What if I bought it? Not to help them, not to reconcile, but to show them exactly who Michelle Monroe had become without them. I called my realtor that night. Buying my childhood home wasn't a simple decision. For days, I paced my penthouse, debating whether I was being petty or powerful. Was this about revenge or reclamation? In the end, I realized it didn't matter. I wanted that house, and for once in my life, I had the means to get what I wanted. I contacted my attorney, Sarah Klein, to handle the purchase. I want to remain anonymous until the sale is final, I instructed. Use your firm as the buyer of record. Sarah raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. She knew enough of my history to understand this wasn't a typical real estate transaction. The asking price is $5.2 million, she noted. Are you sure about this? I nodded. Offer $5.5 million, cash, with a 2-week closing. I want to eliminate any competition. The offer was accepted within hours. My parents were desperate, just as the news reports had suggested. Monroe Industries, once valued at over $200 million, had collapsed under my father's increasingly poor management and my brother Jacob's risky investments after he joined the company. While the sale proceeded, I dug deeper into what had happened. Monroe Industries had failed to adapt to changing markets. My father, always rigid and traditional, had refused to innovate until it was too late. Jacob, eager to prove himself, had leveraged the company heavily for expansions that never generated returns. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they disowned for lacking business sense had built a thriving company, while they had run their empire into the ground. The night before closing, I received a text from an unknown number. Michelle, it's Jacob. I heard rumors about the buyer of the house. Is it you? My brother had reached out sporadically over the years, a birthday text here, a holiday greeting there, but never enough to truly stay connected, never enough to matter. He was always caught between loyalty to our parents and guilt about what had happened to me. I didn't respond. The closing was scheduled for 3 p.m. on a Friday. At 2:45, I parked my Audi a block away and walked to the offices of Klein and Associates. Sarah greeted me with the paperwork ready. Are your parents aware you're the buyer? She asked. No, I replied, signing my name with steady hands. They'll find out soon enough. By 3:30, the house was officially mine. I held the keys in my palm, feeling their weight, not just metal, but the past, present, and future all compressed into a small, brass form. The sellers requested 2 weeks to move out, Sarah informed me. Standard procedure. I shook my head. The contract specified immediate occupancy. I'm going today. Sarah looked concerned. Michelle, I understand this is personal, but it's business, I interrupted, echoing what my father had taught me long ago. Just business. I drove directly to the estate, passing through the same iron gates I had once stared through as a homeless teenager. The driveway curved gracefully through manicured gardens that had seen better days. The landscaping was still impeccable, but there was a weariness to the place, as if the house itself knew its owners had failed. Moving trucks were parked near the entrance. Workers carried boxes and furniture out the front door while my parents presumably directed the process inside. They weren't expecting the new owner today. They certainly weren't expecting me. I parked behind one of the trucks and walked toward the house I hadn't entered in 12 years. The massive double doors stood open as movers carried out an antique sideboard that had been in our dining room for as long as I could remember. I stepped past them into the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. The space was half empty, with rectangular clean spots on the walls where paintings had hung. The marble floor echoed beneath my heels as I walked toward voices coming from the library. "We need to be out by the end of the day," my father's voice commanded, though it lacked the authority I remembered. He sounded tired, defeated. "Richard, that's impossible," my mother replied. "There's still so much to pack." The new owner was very clear: immediate occupancy. Klein was adamant about it. I paused in the doorway of the library. My father stood with his back to me, his once black hair now streaked with gray. He'd lost weight. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. My mother sat on a leather chair, her perfect posture unchanged, but her face lined with years of stress I hadn't witnessed. For a moment, I was 16 again, afraid of their judgment, their rejection. Then I remembered who I was now, what I had accomplished despite them. "Actually," I said, stepping into the room, "the new owner is here." They both turned at the sound of my voice. My mother's hand flew to her throat, her eyes widening in shock. My father seemed to age another decade in an instant, the color draining from his face as he stared at the daughter he had thrown away. "Michelle?" my mother whispered, as if seeing a ghost. "Hello, Mother," I replied calmly. "Father." My father's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. For the first time in my life, I had rendered Richard Monroe speechless. "What are you doing here?" he finally managed. I smiled, not warm, not kind, but confident. "I'm home." The silence that followed felt eternal. My mother's face had gone so pale, I thought she might faint. My father's jaw clenched and unclenched, a familiar sign of his controlled rage. "What do you mean you're home?" he finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I held up the keys. "I bought the house. I'm the new owner." My mother let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "That's impossible." "Is it?" I stepped further into the library, my gaze sweeping over the half-empty bookshelves. "Check with your realtor if you don't believe me. Monroe Design, LLC is now the legal owner of this property." My father's eyes narrowed at the company name. "You're using our family name?" "My family name," I corrected him. "And yes, it's become quite valuable in the design world." Before either could respond, a voice called from the hallway. "Mom? Dad? Did you see where the movers put my—" Jacob stopped abruptly in the doorway, his eyes widening as he saw me. At 26, my little brother had grown into a man, though his face still held boyish features. He'd always looked more like our mother, soft brown eyes, gentle features, unlike me with my father's sharp angles and stubborn jawline. "Michelle," he whispered, sounding like the 12-year-old boy I'd left behind. Despite everything, my heart softened. "Hi, Jacob." He rushed forward, engulfing me in a hug that caught me off guard. I stood stiffly in his embrace, unsure how to respond. "This wasn't part of my plan." "I knew it was you," he said, pulling back to look at me. "When I heard about the cash offer, the quick closing, it had to be you." My father cleared his throat. "Jacob, give us a moment with your sister." "Half-sister," my mother corrected automatically, then looked horrified at her own words. The old pain flashed through me. Of course, I'd always been the first wife's daughter, to Eleanor, who had married my father when I was 5. Never fully her child. Always slightly other. It had been easier to accept her coldness, knowing this. Jacob was their biological child, their true heir. "Actually," I said, my voice cooling, "I need a word with all of you. This concerns the house and your situation." My father straightened his shoulders, attempting to reclaim some dignity. "We were given 2 weeks to vacate. The contract specified immediate occupancy," I replied. "But I'm willing to be reasonable. You can have 3 days to remove your personal belongings. Anything left behind becomes mine." "This is outrageous," my father sputtered. "You can't just—" I can, I interrupted. And I am. 3 days is generous, considering you gave me 2 hours. The reference to my expulsion hung in the air between us. Jacob looked confused, glancing between us. What is she talking about? My mother shot me a warning look, but I ignored it. They never told you? They kicked me out when I was 16. 2 hours to pack, then the locks were changed. Jacob turned to our parents, disbelief written across his face. Is that true? My father's expression hardened. It was a difficult decision. Michelle was making poor choices. I wanted to study design instead of business. I clarified for Jacob's benefit. That was my crime. Jacob looked stunned. You told me she left for art school, that she chose to stay away. My mother stepped forward, her composure returning. Jacob, it was complicated. Your sister was rebellious, defiant. I was 16. I cut in. And now I'm 30, standing in the house I bought with the money I earned from the career you tried to prevent me from having. The irony seemed to hit my father all at once. He sank into a leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. So, this is your revenge? Buying our home when we're at our lowest? I hadn't expected the question to sting, but it did. Was this revenge? Maybe partly. But it was also something else, something I wasn't ready to name. This is business, I replied, using his favorite phrase. The house was for sale. I wanted it. I bought it. Where are we supposed to go? My mother asked, her voice small. We've lost everything. For the first time since entering, I allowed myself to really look around. The library had been my favorite room growing up. Walls of books, the scent of leather and paper, window seats where I'd spent countless hours sketching and dreaming. Now it was half dismantled, boxes stacked in corners, bare patches on walls where family photos had hung. My triumph suddenly felt hollow. I hadn't just bought a house. I'd purchased my parents' downfall. The reality of their situation, their complete financial ruin, hit me harder than I'd expected. I have a property, I said before I could reconsider. A small house near the lake. It's furnished. You can stay there while you figure things out. All three of them stared at me with identical expressions of shock. Why would you help us? My father asked suspiciously. A fair question. Why was I helping them? These people had thrown me away without a second thought. They'd let me struggle, homeless and alone, while they continued their comfortable lives. They deserved nothing from me. Yet here I was, offering them shelter. I'm not doing it for you, I finally said. I'm doing it because I'm not you. The words landed like a slap. My father flinched visibly, while my mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Jacob stepped forward. Michelle, thank you. We don't deserve your help, but... No, I agreed. You don't. But the offer stands for 3 months. After that, you're on your own. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my assistant. Someone will bring you the address and keys. I expect you all to be gone by Monday morning. As I turned to leave, my father called after me. Michelle, wait. His voice had lost its commanding edge. The company, Monroe Industries, there might still be a way to save it. With your success, perhaps you could invest. I stopped and looked back at him, incredulous. Even now, even after everything, he was still trying to use me. Goodbye, father, I said quietly. I'll see you out on Monday. I walked out of the library, my heels echoing on the marble floors of what was now my house. As I stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. I had reclaimed my past, but I wasn't sure what to do with my future. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that only comes after a restless night. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying the confrontation with my parents, questioning my decisions, my motives. Had I gone too far? Not far enough? I arrived at the mansion at precisely 10 a.m. A moving truck was just pulling away. They had taken my deadline seriously. Good. I parked in the circular driveway and sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. This wasn't just a property acquisition. It was the reclaiming of my past. Every room held memories, some beautiful, others painful. Could I really live here, or was this purchase simply an expensive form of therapy? As I approached the front door, I noticed Jacob sitting on the steps, a duffel bag at his feet. He stood when he saw me.
"They're gone," he said.
"Left about an hour ago." I nodded, unsurprised that my parents hadn't waited to say goodbye. "And you? I wanted to talk to you." He gestured toward the duffel bag. Before I joined them, I hesitated, then unlocked the door. "Come in, then." The house was eerily quiet. Most of the furniture remained, part of the sale, but the personal touches were gone. No family photos, no mother's collectibles, no father's golf trophies. Just empty spaces where a family's life had once been displayed. "Coffee," I offered, heading toward the kitchen. Jacob followed.
"Sure."
The kitchen was, as I remembered, massive, gleaming, and rarely used by anyone but the staff. I found 2 mugs in a cabinet and started the coffee maker. "They didn't tell me the truth," Jacob said abruptly. "About why you left." I measured coffee grounds carefully, focusing on the task rather than the knot forming in my throat. "What did they tell you?" "That you'd chosen art school over family. That you cut contact."
He paused.
I was 12. I believed them. The coffee maker gurgled to life. I turned to face my brother. "And now I know they kicked out a 16-year-old girl for wanting to follow her passion." His voice cracked slightly. "My sister." I wanted to stay detached, to keep the walls I'd built firmly in place, but Jacob's obvious distress was wearing them down.
"It was a long time ago," I said.
"Not to me." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like our father it almost made me smile. "I've spent 12 years thinking you abandoned us."
"Abandoned me?"
The accusation stung, even though I knew it wasn't fair. "I was homeless, Jacob. I was trying to survive." "I know that now," he replied quickly. "And I'm not blaming you. I'm just processing." I poured the coffee, using the moment to compose myself. "How involved were you in the company's failure?" Jacob accepted the mug I offered, cradling it in his hands. "Dad made me vice president when I graduated college. I was 22, completely unqualified." He laughed bitterly. "I thought it was because I was brilliant. Now I realize he just needed someone to control." "And he controlled you?" "Completely." Jacob sipped his coffee. "Every idea I had was shot down. That's not how we do things at Monroe Industries." When I pushed back, he'd threatened to replace me with a real businessman. Despite everything, I felt a rush of empathy. I had escaped our father's control. Jacob had remained trapped in it. 2 years ago, he continued, I finally convinced him to let me lead an expansion project. It failed spectacularly. He looked up at me, his eyes haunted. "I lost $50 million, Michelle. Dad had leveraged everything for that project." "It wasn't just your mistake," I said quietly.
He was the CEO.
The responsibility was ultimately his. Jacob set down his mug. "Tell that to Mom. She barely speaks to me now." This new information shifted something inside me. My parents' fall wasn't simply the result of my father's stubbornness or bad market conditions. Jacob had played a role, a substantial one, in their downfall. And yet, they hadn't cast him out. They hadn't disowned him. They'd kept him close, even in failure. The double standard was breathtaking. "I'm sorry," I said, surprising myself with my sincerity. "That must be difficult." Jacob looked up sharply. "You're sorry? After what they did to you?" I shrugged. "I can be sorry for your pain without excusing their behavior." He studied me for a long moment. "You've changed." "We all have." I glanced around the kitchen, at the space that was now mine. "Life does that." Jacob hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I found this while packing. I thought you might want it." I unfolded it carefully. It was a sketch I'd done at 15, a redesign of the mansion's living room. I'd transformed the stuffy, traditional space into something modern and airy, with clean lines and natural light. Even then, my design sensibilities had been forming. "You kept this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Jacob nodded. "I kept everything of yours I could find after you left. Some drawings, a few photos." He swallowed hard. "I missed you, Michelle." The simple confession broke something inside me, A final barrier I hadn't even realized I was maintaining. Tears pricked at my eyes. I missed you too, I admitted. But I couldn't come back. Not after. I know. Jacob reached across the counter and took my hand. I wouldn't have either. We sat in silence for a moment, the coffee growing cold between us. What are you going to do with the house? He finally asked. I looked around, seeing the space not as it was, but as it could be. Redesign it. Make it mine. And the company? Dad thinks you might invest. I laughed shortly. Dad thinks a lot of things. It's not completely unsalvageable, Jacob said cautiously. The core business is still viable. It was the expansion that killed us. I studied my brother's face. There was hope there, but also resignation. He expected me to say no. I'm not interested in saving Dad's legacy, I said firmly. Jacob nodded, unsurprised. I understand. But I continued, surprising myself. I might be interested in transforming it into something new. His head snapped up. What does that mean? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But send me the financials. I'll look them over. For the first time since I'd returned, I saw a genuine smile spread across Jacob's face. Really? No promises, I warned. And if I get involved, it would be on my terms. Completely. Of course, he agreed quickly. And Jacob, I added, don't tell them. Not yet. He nodded, understanding. My lips are sealed. As I watched my brother leave, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. My parents had thrown me away without hesitation. Why should I help them now? But maybe this wasn't about them at all. Maybe this was about reclaiming not just my childhood home, but every piece of my past they had tried to control. 2 weeks passed before I contacted my parents. I spent that time settling into the mansion, sleeping in the guest room rather than my old bedroom or the master suite. I wasn't ready for either of those spaces yet. I hired contractors to begin renovations, transforming the dark, oppressive interior into something light and modern. Every wall of heavy wood paneling that came down felt like shedding another layer of my past. Meanwhile, I reviewed Monroe Industries' financials. The situation was dire, but not hopeless. The core business, manufacturing specialized components for medical devices, was still profitable. It was my father's attempt to expand into consumer electronics that had failed catastrophically, draining capital and creating unsustainable debt. After careful analysis, I made my decision. Not an emotional one, but a business one. Then I invited my parents to dinner. They arrived exactly on time. My father in a suit that hung loosely on his frame, my mother in a designer dress that had seen better days. They stood awkwardly in the foyer, taking in the changes already underway, walls removed, floors stripped, furniture rearranged. You've changed things, my mother observed, her voice neutral. Just getting started, I replied, leading them to the dining room. I'd had it catered, a simple but elegant meal served on the same fine china they'd used for important business dinners throughout my childhood. The symbolism wasn't lost on them. My father cleared his throat as we sat down. Jacob mentioned you might be interested in discussing the company. Of course he had. I made a mental note to remind my brother about discretion. I've reviewed the financials, I said, serving myself salad. The situation is worse than I initially thought. My father stiffened. The expansion was a calculated risk. It was reckless, I corrected him. And it nearly destroyed a century-old company. Michelle, my mother, intervened. We didn't come here to be lectured. I met her gaze steadily. Why did you come, Mother? She looked away first. Jacob seemed to think you might help. I conceded. But first, I need to understand something. My father reached for his water glass. What's that? Why me? I asked simply. After 12 years of silence, after throwing me out, why come to me now? My parents exchanged glances. My father set down his fork. Because you're successful, he admitted finally. Because you built something substantial out of nothing. While you destroyed something substantial and turned it into nothing, I observed. My mother flinched. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't refute the statement. What do you want, Michelle? He asked after a moment. Is it an apology?
Fine.
I'm sorry we were harsh with you. Harsh? I repeated incredulously. You disowned your 16-year-old daughter and left her homeless. We thought you'd go to your aunt's, my mother said quickly. We never imagined you'd have nowhere to go. I set down my knife with deliberate care. You never called to check. You never reached out to make sure I was safe. You were always stubborn, my father insisted. We thought you'd come to your senses. And when I didn't, when weeks became months, became years. Neither answered. The silence was damning. I've made a decision about Monroe Industries, I said, changing the subject. The business discussion was safer territory than the wound that still hadn't healed. My father leaned forward. And I'll save it, but not for you. For Jacob. My mother's eyes widened. Jacob? But he made mistakes. I finished for her.
Yes.
Mistakes you let him make while he was too young and inexperienced to know better. I looked pointedly at my father. Sounds familiar. His face darkened. The situations are completely different. Are they?
I asked.
Jacob wanted to prove himself to you, to earn your approval.
I wanted the freedom to follow my own path.
We both paid prices for those choices, but only one of us was abandoned for it. My father pushed his plate away. If you're just going to throw the past in our faces, the past is why we're here, I interrupted. You threw me away when I didn't fit your vision for my life. Now I own your home, and I'm considering saving your company. The past is very much present in this room. My mother dabbed at her lips with a napkin. What are your terms? Always practical, Eleanor. Always cutting to the heart of the transaction. I'll clear the company's debt and restructure it, I stated. In return, I take 60% ownership. Jacob gets 30%. You each retain 5%. My father's face flushed. That's outrageous. That company has been in my family and you ran it into the ground, I said evenly. You're lucky I'm offering you anything. What would our roles be? My mother asked, shooting my father a warning glance. Advisory only, I replied. No executive authority. Jacob will be COO, reporting to me as CEO. My father stood abruptly. This is a hostile takeover. No, I corrected him. A hostile takeover would be letting the company fail and buying the assets for pennies on the dollar. I'm offering you a lifeline. A lifeline that strips us of everything we've built, he seethed. I looked up at him, finally allowing some of my long-suppressed anger to surface. Isn't that what you did to me? Stripped me of my home, my family, my security, everything, because I wouldn't follow your plan?
He had no answer to that.
My mother reached across the table, not quite touching my hand. Michelle, we made mistakes. Terrible ones. But please don't punish the company, the employees, because of them. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. Not quite taking responsibility, but at least acknowledging harm. I'm not punishing anyone, I said quietly. I'm setting boundaries. The company can thrive under new leadership. Jacob has good ideas that you never let him implement. Together, we can rebuild it. Without us, my father said bitterly. You'll still have your 5%. You'll still have the lake house. You'll still have each other, I pointed out. That's more than you left me with. He turned away, unable to meet my eyes. My mother studied me for a long moment. You've become formidable. It wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. For Eleanor, it was practically a declaration of respect. I had to, I replied simply. After they left, I stood in the foyer of what was now truly my home. The dinner hadn't gone as I'd expected. I'd anticipated more resistance, more hostility. Instead, I'd seen something I never thought I'd witness. My parents humbled. Not repentant, exactly, but shaken from their pedestals of superiority. They had agreed to my terms, not enthusiastically, but pragmatically. The papers would be signed next week. Monroe Industries would become mine, just as the house had. I wandered through the half-renovated rooms, touching walls that were being transformed, spaces that were becoming mine not by inheritance, but by reclamation. In the library, now stripped of its dark paneling and open to natural light, I found the sketch Jacob had given me. I'd had it framed. Looking at it now, I realized something profound. The girl who had drawn those hopeful lines had survived. Despite everything, she had thrived. My parents had tried to extinguish her creativity, her independence, her spirit. They had failed. I had won. But victory felt different than I'd imagined. Not triumphant or vengeful, but calm, peaceful, complete. I had spent 12 years fighting to prove my worth. Now I finally understood. I had nothing to prove to them, only to myself. And I had done that one day at a time, one design at a time, one client at a time. The mansion, the company, they weren't prizes I'd won in some contest with my parents. They were simply the natural outcomes of the life I had built without them. I was Michelle Monroe, not their daughter, not their failure, not their redemption, just myself.
And that was enough.